What's up, everybody? This is the Existential Stoic podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. Today's episode, I know I didn't do the what's up,
Threw me
Danny thing.
all.
Today, I know today's episode, we're just going to do a nice, simple topic for all of you, the meaning of life. What's
Yeah,
going on,
we can
Danny?
we can fix it, solve it. Everyone will be better off for this after what, like a few minutes of listening, they'll know, and then they can go about their life.
Yeah, because it
Having
shouldn't be too
purpose.
hard to figure it
mm,
out.
Yeah. Isn't that funny that I was thinking about this actually. It's funny you brought that up because like I think about this actually more often than I probably should, I guess. But like it's funny that like, you look back at all these like wise people, sages and stuff that have left works that have still survived for thousands of years. We still pour over, we still look at. And it's like the same questions that they asked, we still are asking. Like it's amazing when you look at it. Like if you look at philosophy, like Plato asked most of the questions philosophers still ask now, and they're still unanswered. Because there is, it's like he has this great thing, I think it's in Euthyphro, where he says, he asks Euthyphro, like, what do the gods argue about? He's like, they don't argue about like, and I'm gonna make this more modern, but like, we wouldn't argue about like the weight of one of us or like the size of a table because we can just measure it, right? There's no argument necessary. It's a factual thing. But things like beauty, justice, meaning, those we argue about constantly because there is no factual final determination on it, right?
Mhm.
And I think that's a really interesting point because this is where like, human beings seem to be stuck is we have all this stuff we can know that seems like concrete enough, like, measurable things like that. And then on the other hand, we have all this stuff that like really comes down to belief, I think. And there's no way to 100% know that it's certain. And I think that's where we kind of struggle.
Yeah, and even those things that we do know for certain can change over time. Like, how many
Yeah.
times have we known something for sure, and then later on we found out something else, and then we're like, well, maybe that's not exactly
Well,
100%
that's the
true.
funny thing, right? Because even science and stuff is still a construct. So even that changes dramatically over time. So even that stuff we don't really know. Yeah,
Hmm.
it's interesting.
Yeah. So that being said, let's figure out what the meaning of life is.
Yeah, it's a hard one. Everybody struggles with this.
Yeah.
Have you found any way that because I'll say this, like I know, and I get, like I know Nietzsche seemed to like, he seemed to very much focus on achievements as being important in life, and I think
Hmm.
I do feel that sometimes where I think a lot of times like we do derive a lot of meaning in our lives from the work we do or the projects we take on if they're important to us. And I think that's the key thing, like especially if you come up with them on your own and they're like important to you, not just like because you have a job or something, right? Like I
Hmm.
think that can be a very big way we find meaning. And you see that for a lot of people who like have causes that they're adamant about, right? That they are out there doing stuff for. Like you can see their life filled with this purpose that a lot of us maybe lack. And I think
Hmm.
there is that there.
But you kind of have to consider, I think that the meaning of life is probably going to be different for most people. And like,
Yeah.
some people may think that achieving things is great. Other people might think that enjoying life is great. And it's very difficult to do both at the same time. A,
Yeah.
a lot of
I
times
mean,
achievement comes at the expense of enjoyment, at least in the short term. Maybe more in the long term, you can enjoy it. But then I actually read something today. Oh, it was darn, I wish I had it here. But basically, it was this thing where it's this story about somebody who died, and they're like, the doctors say he died from smoking too much. But nobody ever says people died because, they didn't have enough human connection, or, they didn't have enough friends in life, or they just didn't think good of themselves, or, they were working a job they didn't enjoy their whole entire life. Nobody says it's anything like that. It's just like he had this one thing that he enjoyed, smoking cigarettes, and that's what killed him. And it's like,
that's what killed them. Yeah.
yeah, and it's like, that is an interesting way to look at it because you never know. You just
Well,
never know.
it's on that note, not to get off topic, but during the pandemic, I remember reading a study they did because there was a big fear of loneliness being a problem during that because, all of a sudden everybody was cut off and a lot of people live alone in the US. So it's like you weren't able to get out stuff as easily. And they did a study and they found, and I don't know how good the study was. I think from my memory, I think it was pretty good, but it was like loneliness was the equivalent of smoking like 3 packs a day of cigarettes. Like that's how they did the math in terms of like stress, heart attack risk, things like all these risks go up
Hmm.
without that human connection. And I think that is a big part of it. I think finding like um I know I've seen it on social media and stuff like the tribe thing, like finding your tribe. But I think there
Yeah.
is
Oh my
some
gosh,
truth.
that
I hate
word,
that
dude.
stuff.
I know. I just
I
want
know
to
it
punch
makes me
people in the
so
mouth when they say that.
I do. It makes me so angry for some reason. I don't know why. It triggers me
Yeah.
so much. But I think that idea concept there is some truth to, which is namely finding like-minded individuals, finding people that you can form real relationships with is like a huge source of meaning and value in life that makes your life meaningful because you're sharing life with others, you know?
It's this crazy paradox. I was actually thinking about this today, where it's like on one hand, yes, you have this like craving to be around other people, but then I never realize how much other people annoy me until I'm around other people, and then I want to get away from them as soon as possible.
Well, you know,
And
it's
it's
I
like
realize,
walking that fine
yeah,
line.
I realize that about myself, like that I am very introverted, I think. Like I don't particularly like going out. I don't be like being around crowds. Now I like people, that's true, but like certain people and
And
but you
even
know, I
so, in
think
limited quantities, because
yeah.
like there's this, I've noticed there's like a fixed amount of time that I can spend with somebody before we're just at each other's throats.
When I noticed too, like big events just wear on me. Like, and
Mhm.
I can feel it. And it's not any one particular person at the event. It's like the whole thing just drains, saps my energy. It's really weird. And
Yeah.
but I think that's the other thing. I noticed that more because like when I was younger, like the meaning of life, I used to, I thought like you'd find like this thing, this like this truth that like, was important to you, and that would be it. And then I realized as I got older too, I think that like it's also more about just knowing yourself. And you do start to know yourself more as you get older. I think that's one of the benefits of getting older is like your your concern about others drops, I think. Your concern about fitting in and stuff drops and you focus more on yourself, I think, and which is good. And once you start to know yourself, you can figure out like what really is right for me. Like what makes and I think that's really all about what life is, right? It's just figuring out
Mm.
like how can I navigate this world in the way that suits me the best, given the type of person I am.
Huh. Yeah. I wonder if you can ever know the meaning of life without looking back on it. You
That's
know,
a good
if we,
question. Yeah. And then that
because
raises the issue of are you looking
it's
back
just
on
gonna
it
be what it,
fairly?
yeah, but it's just gonna be whatever it is. Like you had no, this is the crazy thing. It's like you think you have all these choices, but you really don't because there's only the one thing that you do. And then
Yeah.
looking back, you look back like, gee, I could have done that or I could, but it's not true. The only thing you could have done was what you did. So isn't that in essence 100% the meaning of life? Exactly what you did?
Yeah. The life you lived, right? Because
Hmm.
that's the one, that's what I always found so interesting about existentialists, like this emphasis on authenticity and the idea of like what we do telling something to the world, right? And I think if you think about that, it is kind of amazing that like everything I do, I'm saying to the world that this is good behavior, this is acceptable behavior, and I value it. And if you start to really think about that, it can be a very scary thought sometimes that like, think about who you're portraying to the world, and is that the kind of person you want to be?
So I was walking and I saw a roadkill frog today. I mean, you've probably seen one of these things. They're like
Where they're
flattened by 100
flattened.
cars and it's just like a
Yeah.
piece of
It's like
frog
part of
jerky.
the road.
Yeah, pretty much. And I
Frog
was
jerky,
looking
that's
at
a
it
good
and I'm like, I attribute my own life to have so much more meaning than that frog. But at one point, I'm going to just be as dead and gone as that frog. And all these problems that I think that I have in my life, they all, don't mean
I
anything.
think that's the problem with human beings because we have consciousness and self-awareness to a degree that most other creatures don't. And I think that's all we're just animals too, though. Like at the end of the day, and this is the other thing I like about the
And he should
like
have
at the
been
end of the
better at
day,
crossing the road because he could have played
yeah,
Frogger a time or two before he
yeah,
attempted it.
right. Figured it out. I remember, dude, it's totally off topic, but I'm gonna say it anyway. I remember when I was younger, so I used to love like little frogs and stuff, and I would try to collect them. And I
Yeah.
remember I found there was this like little like creek by us, I guess like stream or something, and like certain times of year, all the baby frogs would like just like thousands and thousands of these tiny little frogs. And the one
Uh-huh.
year, I was like, I'm gonna catch them, bring them home, they'll grow up, it'll be awesome. So I put them in this thing, I put air holes, and then I left it on the porch in the sun.
Oh,
And to be fair, I was like,
yeah.
couldn't have been more than like 8. So I
Yeah,
didn't
but you
know.
don't know that stuff. It has to happen once
Yeah.
before you figure it out.
Yeah. And then I learned. And I was so upset. Like
Yeah.
50 little guys, like all dried. I was like,
Oh,
oh, yeah.
oh.
It was sad.
Yeah,
I
that's
stopped doing that after
I
that.
know, right?
But
Dude, but like
yeah,
it's the dream of every little kid to have a bunch of frogs, a little
yeah, and
terrarium,
stuff. Yeah.
turtle, all the other
And they
fun
put
stuff
some
you can have.
grass, a leaf,
Hmm.
and all the
Yeah,
things to recreate his natural habitat.
yeah.
Hmm.
So,
But at
anyways,
any rate,
but here, okay, so how about maybe if we don't know what the meaning of life is, what's not the meaning of life? I'll
well,
start
I go ahead.
taking pictures of your food, every single meal you eat.
Yeah. Yeah, sharing on social media gets old. I think this is, but I think, I
I
think you
just
do
can't
found something.
I can't like I was out uh grabbing some food and like there was a couple and they were eating and they both ordered meals and it showed up and the husband was about to start eating and the wife like smacked him and she had to take a picture of his food first and then a picture of her food and then she's like, okay, now you can eat. I was like, this is ridiculous.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah. Nobody cares. And also, if they want to see the pictures of the food, go to the restaurant's website and they're better pictures,
Yeah.
usually, especially if it's a nice restaurant.
Yep.
Like, they have a professional come in and take pictures of the actual food, not with a phone.
Yep.
Yeah. It's funny how many people I see literally use social media all the time and talk about how miserable it makes them simultaneously. And it's like
Yeah.
crazy.
Hmm.
But I think this is also the conundrum of human beings, right? Which is like we like distractions. And I think we run this risk of like, it's easy to run from our problems and distract ourselves and not deal with things. It's far easier to do that. And I know that. Like, it's 100% easier to distract ourselves. The hardest thing is like facing these things. And I think that's the biggest failure we all make is instead of facing stuff, we distract ourselves, deny it, and hide from it until it's way too late. And then by the time we realize it and how crappy it's been, we've been doing it for decades, And then it's like now it feels like we have to start all over. So I think like I really think like yeah, the worst thing you can do is not self-examine and not self-reflect to know what really you want. Because I think that's really where like you'll find a life that's meaningful.
Hmm. What do you I wonder about this because people are so distracted with their phones nowadays. Like I fantasize all the time what it would have been like before phones. Like I try and remember.
Well, we were
I'll be
there,
active. I know, but like
but we were kids. I know it's
yeah,
not
it
the
kind of
same.
took it
It's
for
like,
granted because we didn't realize where things would go. I kind of like imagine what things would have been like walking through, I don't know, a bunch of stores or something with people without everybody on their phone, being like, hmm, we're like people busy reading the newspaper and not looking where they were going. Were they like reading books or, doing other stuff to try and pretend that,
well,
you
that's the
know,
funny thing. If you look at history, like when the printing press came out, they said the same thing they said about the TV and the phone when it came out. It's
Mhm.
kind of funny that you see like any kind of these advances in information sharing are scary.
Yeah,
And I think part of it is because we get information overload. Like, I don't think we can handle that much, of
no.
like what's going on in the world around us. I'm not talking about like just learning, but I'm talking about, that it can be really hard to take in. And yeah, I remember being little and like my mom, like trying to reach my dad at work and calling him and they'd be like, oh, he's not in this place right now. So like, you just have to wait. Like, there's nothing you can do. It's not like there's a phone you can
Hmm.
call.
Or like
If it's an
leaving a message
emergency,
for somebody and just
yeah,
hoping they would get back to you sometime.
I remember if it was emergency, people would be like have to go get them and stuff like that. But like generally speaking, I think it made us more aware of like what was a serious issue that
Hmm.
required like extra action versus like what's just a regular checkup or phone call or something.
Yeah.
Whereas now
There's
we treat everything as like the end of the world.
everything's
You
emergency.
know?
But there's very, very few actual real emergencies. And then also like if there is a real emergency, most people can't do anything about it anyways.
No,
Yeah.
no. Well, that's another good one I think is like trying to control things that are not in your control. I mean, we just talked about that recently, but I think that's an important one too. That can really mess you up with when it comes to having a meaningful life. It's funny when you think back to actually on like the past. Like I remember when I was in high school, like I think what everybody wanted then was like you wanted a fancy car, a big house, like all this stuff. And then as I got older, I was like, I don't actually want any of that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's funny like to like think about that too, like, how our view of what would be like the best life or good life changes so much over time. And I think so keeping that in mind because that's where that self-reflection I think is necessary to keep kind of coming back to.
Do you think it's helpful to contemplate your own mortality or contemplate your own death in order to have a meaningful life?
Oh, hell yeah.
Hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, because if you don't, you think you have forever. I mean, this is where I think this is where that denial and distraction gets really comes in. It's if we're not, if we think about our death, there's this immediacy to our decisions now, right?
Hmm.
Like there's this awareness that we're not going to last forever. And it's hard to like, I think about that sometimes, right? Like, I'm 40 now. On average, I have probably another 40 years, give or take. That's still a long time, right? I mean, that's still, I mean, assuming nothing else happens, that's still a significant amount of time. So it is hard sometimes to think like, oh, it's not that close, right? It's easy
Hmm.
to kind of forget about it, but you have to kind of reflect on it and remind yourself you do. And it helps you make decisions that are more appropriate to what matters to you.
Hmm. Yeah. And because I think about that often, and I try and do most things to where, like, if I were to die sometime soon, I would be okay with it because I've done pretty much all the stuff that I've wanted to do. But like,
Yeah,
all the time. I have conversations with people, and they're like, they're not doing anything that they want to do. Like, they have this gigantic bucket list that's enormous, and they just keep adding to it, and they've never tackled a single thing on it.
yeah. And I think a lot of that sometimes is fear and stuff of doing new things and all, but you just have to do it. It's hard. We also get lulled by security, right? That sense of normalcy and stuff can really be like a thing that causes complacency rather than striving for more or happiness or doing things that we really want to do. We get lulled by this routine of every day, And I think that's also dangerous. Like we have to be worried about that, but thinking about our death, right? Like asking
Yeah.
yourself, like, if I found I had terminal illness and knew I was gonna die in 6 months, would I do this thing?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a good way to ask yourself, like, is this really important?
I remember when I was working as a vet, one of the nurses, they were like, they so badly wanted to go to like some place in Europe. I don't remember where it was. So
Let's
badly
just
wanted to
go.
travel. And I was like, well, you have a passport? And they're like, nope. I was like, well, step one,
Get
get on
that.
top of that.
And they're good for like 10 years.
Yeah.
So you don't even have to go right away, but just get it, then you have that thing out
Hmm.
of the way. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, doing things that you want to do, I think, realizing that this is your life. I used to kill me, dude. I remember in grad school, I had a buddy who was going to be a lawyer, and I was like, well, what is your plan? He's like, well, I'm going to work a lot. He's like, then I'll enjoy myself. And I was like, that is not a good plan. I was like, assuming one, that you're going to be alive, have the physical capacity to do what you want to do, you're making a lot of assumptions about later in life, you
Hmm.
know, by
Yeah.
taking that model. And you're also assuming that you're not going to get so used to working 80 hours a week that you're just going to be able to turn that off and do something else after you've done that and habituated it for 40
Dude,
years.
retirement is like the worst for people because they don't know
Yeah.
what to do with themselves.
Well, it's funny how I don't think a lot of people do things self-motivated. And it's a shame. I think more people should like, start things, try projects, go out and just do stuff that you want to do. I think a lot of people are very passive about it, and it's a shame because I think, there is a whole world out there. Like you should see it.
Yeah. 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 So the meaning of life, I think we answered it.
Probably it's
At
hard.
least we know what it's not.
Yeah,
You can
we know
stop
it's
taking
not.
pictures of your food every single
It's
meal.
for each of us. You really just
Nobody
wanted to bitch
cares.
about that.
Nobody cares. I couldn't believe it.
This is
I
a
couldn't believe it.
roundabout way to
I
get to
couldn't
that
believe
point.
it. Yeah, I couldn't believe it. I was like, how can I bring this up? Let's do an episode on the meaning of life.
Yeah. Yeah, it is
Yeah.
funny though because people that kind of stuff just I don't understand it, I guess is really what it is. Like I just don't understand the value you're
There
getting out of
must be
it.
so much validation from people being like,
I
wow, dude.
guess.
But it's like you don't realize that the people that are saying that are just saying that to be polite. Like
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like, yeah. Oh
I
well.
don't know. I guess it feels like you have that validation, that little part of your world, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, don't
Yeah.
seek validation. Validate yourself. There you
Mm.
go.
There you
There
go.
you go. For meaning
So
in
there
life.
you have it, the meaning of life. If you enjoyed this
Okay.
episode, there's more. We'll catch you guys later. This is the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy. That's Danny. I'll see you later, Danny.
Later, Andy.